When you think of Wisconsin, you probably picture a classic Midwestern state, right? But if you look a little closer, there's this invisible line, a line that literally splits the entire state in two.
So how on earth did a single glacier manage to draw a border? A border that even today decides where people live, where they build their roads, everything. It's wild. Okay, let's get into it.
So check this out. On one side in the southwest, you've got these incredible, wild limestone bluffs, super rugged valleys. But then you cross that invisible line over to the north and east, and bam! The landscape just completely changes. It's all smooth, rolling hills and literally thousands of lakes left over from the Ice Age. It's like two different states in one.
Okay, so to figure this puzzle out, we've got to start with the part of the state the part it just totally missed.
This area has a pretty cool name, the Driftless Area. And that word drift, it's just a geology term for all the junk, rocks and dirt, that glaciers leave behind. So driftless literally means it's a landscape that the last ice age never touched. It's like a little pocket of pre-glacial America, perfectly preserved.
And you can totally see how different it is when you look at the features. There's no flat, scraped down terrain here. Instead, you get these super steep valleys cut right into the limestone. Massive bluffs hanging over rivers, and soil that's ancient, with absolutely no glacial stuff in it. We're talking hidden caves, sinkholes, natural springs. It feels more like the Appalachians than what you'd expect in the Midwest.
All right, so now let's hop across that invisible line, that glacial boundary, and look at the other half of the story, the land that the ice didn't forget, the land it totally remade.
The very first thing you'll notice over here? Lakes. Thousands and thousands of them. And they have a specific name, Kettle Lakes. Just imagine these gigantic chunks of ice, the size of buildings, breaking off the glacier. They get buried under tons of rock and dirt, and then, over time, they melt. And when they do, whoosh, the ground above just collapses, leaving these deep, round lakes. Pretty amazing, right? But the glaciers didn't just leave holes in the ground. They also left behind these things called moraines. Think of them like the pile of dirt a bulldozer pushes up. They're these long, massive ridges of rock and rubble, and they basically act like a footprint, marking the exact line where the edge of that giant glacier paused for a while before it started to melt back.
And then there's one more cool feature, drumlins. These are really fascinating. They're these smooth, long, kind of teardrop-shaped hills made of all that glacial junk. And the coolest part is that their shape is like a giant arrow carved into the landscape, pointing in the exact direction that the ancient ice was moving. They're like frozen-in-time signposts. So when you put it all together, you see this absolutely stark contrast. The Driftless Area, rugged, steep, with deep rivers. The glaciated part, smooth, rolling hills, and just water everywhere in thousands of lakes and wetlands. And this isn't just ancient history. This divide has a huge impact on life today. Those smooth, fertile plains in the glaciated area, perfect for Wisconsin's dairy farms. But that steep, rugged, driftless area, it's a total headache for farming and even just building a simple road.
And, this ancient geological split, it's not just some fun fact. It had some really serious consequences, especially when it ran smack into human ambition.
A perfect example is the Fox, Wisconsin waterway. Okay, so the big dream was to build this epic shipping canal, something to rival the Erie Canal that would connect the Great Lakes all the way to the Mississippi. But the geology just wasn't having it. First, they had to deal with a 170-foot drop in elevation, which meant building tons of locks. But the real killer was the sand, fine glacial sand that filled the riverbeds. It's so loose and shifty that the channels would fill up with silt almost as fast as they could dig them out. It was a maintenance nightmare. And in the end, the railroads, which were smartly built on the higher, more solid ground of those old moraines, they just went right around the whole mess, and the canal became this forgotten, failed project.
We think of glaciers as these slow, grinding forces, but their legacy wasn't always slow. Sometimes the landscape was reshaped not over thousands of years, but in one single, absolutely catastrophic moment.
So picture this. At the tail end of the last ice age, there's this huge ice dam, and it breaks. The flood it unleashed had a peak flow of over 1 million cubic meters per second. That number is so huge it's hard to even imagine. But to put it in perspective, that's like taking 5 Amazon rivers at their absolute peak flood stage and unleashing them all at once, right through the middle of Wisconsin. Just unimaginable power.
For centuries, this enormous lake, called Glacial Lake Wisconsin, sat right in the middle of the state. We're talking about a body of water almost half the size of Lake Erie. And it was all held back by a fragile dam made of ice. Then, around 15,000 years ago, that dam just shattered. And in a matter of days, not millennia, not centuries, but days, the entire lake drained. It was a torrent so powerful it blasted right through solid sandstone, carving out the famous Wisconsin dells that people visit today.
But here's the thing, not all the land just got bulldozed or washed away. Some of it actually fought back. You had these ancient, incredibly hard quartzite ridges, like the Baraboo Hills, that were just too tough for the glacier. The ice literally had to split in two and flow around them. And then you have the Niagara Escarpment, this huge backbone of limestone that acted like a giant rudder, steering the path of the ice. And it's this very landscape, this mix of stubborn, ancient rock and the new meadows left by the glaciers, that inspired a young farm boy who lived there. His name was John Muir, and the lessons he learned from watching this resilient land ended up shaping the entire American conservation movement. It all started right here.
So, what we're really seeing here is so much more than just a state with a weird border. It's a legacy, a story written in stone that stretches back, not thousands, but billions of years.
See, this whole glacier story is just the latest chapter built on a much, much deeper history. That stubborn quartzite rock, it's over 1.6 billion years old. A billion years ago, a continental rift left behind pure copper in the north. Indigenous miners were working that copper 8,000 years ago, making some of the oldest metal objects on the entire continent. And fast forward to today, and the echoes of that last ice age are still shaping where and how people live.
And this is where we see the final, fascinating paradox. On the one hand, this ancient geology created amazing opportunities, like the copper that fueled huge trade networks for centuries. But on the other hand, it created massive obstacles, like the huge, impassable Horicon Marsh, a remnant of an old glacial lake that, even today, you really can't build on.
So in the end, Wisconsin's split personality isn't a mistake or a flaw. It's actually a lesson. It's a lesson in what happens when deep time, incredible power, and just plain stubbornness all collide. It's a story about resilience, written right there in the stone and the water. And that leaves us with one last thing to think about. The story of Wisconsin's invisible border is pretty incredible, for sure. But it kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? What invisible histories, what ancient lines are shaping the world right outside your own door?